Could Alex Lindstrom go from undrafted free agent signing to Cowboys starting center in week one? Landon and I will break down some of the Cowboys' top free agent signings in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, this kicks off one of my favorite weeks of podcasting with you. We're talking undrafted free agent signings. I love talking about these guys because we don't talk about very many of these guys at all during the draft process. And now that they're with the Cowboys, we can talk about how they fit, can they make the roster. I'm looking forward to it. But how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. You know what this always reminds me of is how close we are to training camp and to rookie mini camps, which obviously I think could kick off today, if I'm not mistaken, or at least this week. So, once we start getting into this process, my appetite starts getting wet for Oxnard and for training camp, and I get so excited.
And these signings are important. I remember us doing the show about this time of year when the Cowboys signed Terrence Steele, and we talked about Terrence Steele as a prospect coming out of Texas Tech, as a guy who, hey, maybe if he improves his strength and some of his footwork, maybe he could be an NFL player. And little did we know, 4 months later, he was going to be starting week one in the NFL season for the Cowboys. So that's why these shows are important.
It's easy to write off these guys. I mean, they have a long shot compared to the draft picks. You know, there's just not a lot of success. I mean, there's not a high percentage of success stories of undrafted free agents making the NFL. But if you're a Cowboys fan, you could easily rattle off a list of many Cowboys contributors and several Cowboys greats that were undrafted free agents. So I think it's good to pay special attention here.
All right, so today we're going to take a look at two offensive line players that the Cowboys signed and a pass rusher. But just one general note about the undrafted free agent signings. Actually, two. First of all, this class is really good for the Cowboys. Like, there's a lot of guys that very easily could have been drafted in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. This is one of the deepest classes that I remember for the Cowboys. And number two, this is one of the older classes that I've seen the Cowboys have. And that's probably because of the COVID year in 2020, right? A lot of these guys had an extra year of eligibility, and somebody like Lindstrom went back to school for that 5th year, got more playing time, and now has a pretty good shot at making the roster. So, any just big takeaways from this class?
I think you mentioned it. Those two things really kind of stick out. And obviously, both are related to the COVID situation, right? There was older players who got an extra year of eligibility, and then there's also just a glut of players that, like we talked about, the kind of what would normally be the drafted middle class of the NFL that are coming out as seniors or 5th-year juniors, which is a crazy thing to say, and they are. They're not getting drafted when they normally would in a normal draft because there's just so many players that are coming out that all fit in that kind of 5th to priority free agent area. So I think a lot of teams are probably very happy with their undrafted haul. I know that the Cowboys certainly are. I will add one more thing, just kind of a 10,000-foot view of the undrafted free agents. They definitely fall into two categories, very distinct categories. And this may seem obvious, but I think even more so than normal, they fall into the high floor, low athleticism situation where they're very well-refined players who understand their technique but are just athletically limited that probably aren't going to get too much better. And then the only athletic, don't know how to play football types that are you're going to have to basically teach from the ground up. I think all three of these guys that we're going to talk about kind of fall into that first bucket, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit in particular.
Or there's maybe one of these guys that is a pretty good athlete and has a lot of experience, but maybe he's just a tad undersized. And let's go ahead and talk about our first guy, Alex Lindstrom, a center prospect from Boston College. A lot of people had some high grades on him. I know Dane had him as a 6th or 7th round player. I know Lance Zierlein had him as a 6th or 7th round guy. I know some people at PFF had him in the 4th or 5th round. But when you went and watched Alex Lindstrom's tape, what did you think?
Well, first of all, I mean, just to preface this, I was an Alec Lindstrom fan going into the draft.
Okay.
I mean, you and I had talked about him beforehand, and it was great to kind of go back and watch. And I do agree that I think of these guys, 3 guys, he's probably the most athletic. But I would also say that generally speaking, he doesn't have a ton of athletic upside, right? Like he's not going anywhere from here, I think, right?
He's probably maxed out, right?
Yeah, and I, what I saw is he's an undersized offensive lineman with average length and hands, very easy moving athlete. Everything with him is quick. He knows what he's doing. He gets through his process quickly. He goes from assignment to assignment without any wasted motion. He's not going to win a sprint. He's not gonna, he's not gonna like be the fastest lineman on your team by any stretch of the imagination. But his process happens quick.
He knows either. Like he's not.
No, he's not
a heavy guy at all.
He's not a sprinter, but you watch his game and you see him moving quickly, right? Like, and I think that's a short area quickness, an ability to get to the second level, those kind of things. I think he certainly isn't slow. But for a guy who's undersized, he also isn't like elite quick either. I think a lot of it has to do with his processing speed and that sort of thing. He gets to the second level after securing the nose to the guard in inside zone very quickly. I mean, he just understands what he's doing very well, and gets through that process really quick. Knows where his targets are. Takes solid steps. He doesn't have any wasted motion getting to the second level, so it looks very clean, very quick. He has the right temperament, but not the right power in his lower half to kind of match that. So there, he has that kind of finisher mentality, but he's not going to drive dudes into the ground. He's not. He just doesn't have that kind of core power. I think he is executing. He always knows the assignment, and most of the time he can execute it well. But the times that he can't is because he can't physically execute it. He's not strong enough. He's not powerful enough to drive guys off the ball. He's more of a kind of a shield blocker, which when you're talking about a center is okay, because you can work in combo blocks to get to the second level. If you're shielding off a linebacker, if you're finishing a linebacker while the running back's getting behind you, that's good enough for sure. In pass protection, I have concerns about him taking on kind of bigger, stronger, the super athletic types.
A little bit.
Yeah, the NFL level tight defensive tackles, right? Those guys that are both big and fast, right? Those are the kind of guys you definitely just don't want to leave Lindstrom alone on an island with those guys. Not that happens very often with centers, but you're seeing a lot more of these very fashionable, and frankly, our defense runs it all the time. Those kind of 5-0 fronts where they're trying to isolate each one of these guys on a defensive lineman. So I have some concerns there. I think, hopefully with 2 big guards playing on either side of them, that would be mitigated a lot. But that is something that to keep an eye on. I have to ask because it's a thing, right? Are QBs bothered by a left-handed center? I obviously not. I will say that it's odd to watch, and I had this issue with Creed Humphreys too, watching the tape. And just seeing it looks weird, right? to see the hand on the wrong side of the ball, it's different. But I don't think it should bother anyone. But it's different and something worth pointing out. Where does he win? Experienced, intelligent execution. He knows what he's doing. He has enough athleticism to get it done. It makes his game look a lot quicker look quick because of just confidence and little wasted motion. Unanswered question: can he make himself useful enough to hang on a roster? Is he good enough as a center to be a backup right away? Because I don't know that he's going to be able to contribute a ton as a special teamer. I think that if he hits his upside here, could he be a starting center? Absolutely, I think he could. If he doesn't, and if he isn't that kind of athlete, I worry that a center-only prospect is tough to fit on your roster if you can't find a spot for him. He's not, like I said, not gonna play a bunch of special teams, so he's got to really make an impression as a center. His tape shows that he can do that. Mm-hmm. The question is is the athleticism enough to kind of influence the coaches to keep him around and potentially, hang him around and work towards improving him in the future, despite the fact that he doesn't really have a ton of athletic upside.
And that's the question here, right? Because if he's not the starter, he's going to have to be on the practice squad. It's just as simple as it is, right? Like you're just not going to be on the roster if you are a backup center only. So can he beat out Tyler Biadasz in year one, Landon? I mean, he's very experienced. 47 games he appeared in, 37 starts. What do you think?
I think that, it's not just him, it's Farniak as well. Clearly, we've heard a lot about Farniak. They are huge fans of him. I think he's going to get some snaps at center.
I still think Farniak's – I mean, I could be wrong, but I think Farniak's more likely to be on the roster because he can play multiple positions. He just has more size, right? I wonder – Farniak could end up being the starter, but I almost wonder if they want him more to be that Swiss Army knife inside.
Maybe, I think that's the question that you've got is that, like, if you make Farniak your starter, who's your kind of swing inside guys? Do you suddenly look at Biadasz for that? It can Biadasz play guard. We'll talk about Empey in a little bit, but I have concerns that both of these guys, we've heard a little bit that, not to talk about him early, but we've heard a little bit that Empey may play guard, but I don't know, man.
Wow,
man. Both of these guys are undersized, and I don't know that they're going to get a lot bigger. I think that Lindstrom can push for that starting center job if he has a really good training camp. Could push for a roster spot. But I could easily see a situation where he's just not as good as those other two guys, and he just can't find a way to make himself useful enough to hang around on the proper roster and either ends up as a practice squad guy or, more likely to get poached by another team.
I've got a feeling we're going to know right away with Lindstrom. Like, we'll know like a week into camp, right? Like, if power is just becoming an issue early on in camp and he's just not able to overcome it, that's probably all she wrote for him as a starting center. But if that's not the issue, and he looks similar to Biadasz, Cowboys might opt to go with Lindstrom because he's cheaper. They have more, control over his contract. Plus, I do think Biadasz, probably because he has more size, probably is a better option to keep inside as a swing guard, even though we've really never seen him do that. But I like Lindstrom. I don't know that I would project him as going to be the starter or anything like that, but I think to me, he's probably the best free agent signing they've had of all these guys. Not to spoil the rest of the shows, but he's probably the guy that I like the best out of all of their free agent signings.
Yeah, and it's not surprising. I mean, he's definitely a name that we knew pretty well going into the situation, and not just because he played next to Zion Johnson. I mean, he was a draft prospect of his own right. So, I agree. I think, if he played any other position, I would say that he has had a good chance to make the roster. And it's not that the depth is great at center. It's just that center only type prospects, it's a tough needle to thread.
Yep. All right, let's take a quick break so we can tell you guys about BetOnline. BetOnline is the #1 source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering needs, including live betting, the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, the next guy, Landon, that we're going to talk about is another center. This one from BYU, James Empey. A little bit older of a prospect, is still a very, very small, undersized center. But James Empey, a 26-year-old rookie from BYU. What did you think?
I'm not shocked that you highlighted his age multiple times before we even got into the guy.
Well, I'm just saying you don't see 26-year-old rookies very often.
This is why this draft is very unique in that sense, right? He had 2 years as an LDS in his LDS religious mission. He redshirted his 2017 season. And then he's just been. I think he actually technically came out. No, he was a senior. I was gonna say he wasn't one of these 5th or 6th year juniors that you actually have seen. So yeah, I mean, I saw a similar situation as far as like a body, right? He's average height for an interior offensive line, but he's slightly under 300 pounds. He's got average length. I think the difference between these two players is that Empey has a little bit of a thicker lower half, it looks like to me. but it doesn't really show up much. I mean, he's not like a lot more powerful than Lindstrom is. We've heard, like you said, I think Broadus mentioned that they potentially could be looking at him as a guard. I mean, I don't know where he's going to add room. He's not even 300 pounds yet, and I don't know where he's going to add growth there. I mean, he's got, like I said, a lot of weight already in his lower half. He's going to need to add it up top. I don't know that there's a lot of growth potential there. He has missed 10 out of the last 25 games in the last 2 seasons with a right ankle injury. I couldn't find out any specifics about that injury. I looked everywhere. But it was both. It was 2 different injuries, one for 4 games and one for 6 games in 2020 and 2021 on the same right ankle, which is a little bit scary, So I would like to know maybe a little bit more about that. But I wonder if, I will say that I think that his athleticism that you see, we have it up here for those of you watching on YouTube, his relative athletic score. I'm having a hard time. Matching the athletic testing to the tape. I don't know if you had that problem as well.
It seems like he's a much better athlete than what the testing numbers show. It's really the explosion stuff is what hurts.
Yeah.
A 25-inch vertical is pretty rough.
I have to wonder if that isn't all related to still recovering from his right ankle injury.
It's possible.
It's just because it just does not the tape and the athletic testing just doesn't jive. He
looks
like
us old guys have a hard time jumping. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I might be able to manage a 26-inch vertical, maybe. But I think if you watch his tape, he moves pretty well. I mean, similar to Lindstrom, I would say. The thing that's really impressive about him is that he uses great leverage. He's on his feet all the time. He's very clean mover. He's got great balance. He just isn't on the ground very much. Which is a thing that you look for with a lot of these offensive linemen is how well are they able to stay up and continue the assignment. He will need assistance versus power and pass protection. He just doesn't have the strength to anchor down. I mean, he has this kind of thicker lower half, but you just don't see that show up in his pass walk. He doesn't have like a super strong base. He looks like he's athletically maxed out, not much room for growth. Great pad level and play balance. I mean, that's the one thing I noticed is that no matter where he is, whether he's just coming off the line and engaging a pass rusher, or he's on the second level trying to hunt for a linebacker in zone blocking, he always is ready with good pad level and balance to strike. He's always got great play stance at the full time. He's just a very well refined game, to him. Just by my last few notes, technically sound but athletically limited. I mean, that's just basically what we're seeing with both of these guys, frankly, him and Lindstrom. Where does he win? Great balance, command, and control of his body. I think he understands exactly what the assignment is. He can do it. He will get there. He's just not going to dominate the competition when he arrives. He's just not going to be that kind of super physical player. I think he likes that aspect of the game, but I don't think he is quite the physical dominating player that some of the other guys are.
All right, just forgetting the projection to the NFL. Whose tape did you like better? Just sheer college tape.
Forgetting the projection?
Yeah, just if you're grading these just your tape, who did you like better?
I kind of think that I liked Empey a little bit better.
So did I.
I mean, just on tape because I like that I like the way he moves. The balance thing is a big deal because it just feels like no matter what he's doing, he's not getting out over his feet. He's playing well within himself. He's playing with control. He just seems like he's in command of what is happening. He's not surprised by anything. He's not, falling off of blocks. He's not leaning over too much. I think to me the question is just what kind of athlete is this guy?
Yeah.
Because
I think that's why I really asked that question is because Lindstrom's just a far better athlete. And even if the tape isn't quite as good, I think it's similar, right?
It's similar, yeah. I think Lindstrom could clean up a couple things and automatically be a much better player than MP is. Yeah. But I not that he's not a non-technical guy. It's just that Empey's he's been in football for 7 years. He's in college football for one way or another 7 years. Even when he's on mission, it just feels like he's refined in a way that you don't see Lindstrom is all the time.
Yep.
You know,
I would also
my
mention,
unanswered question with him, real quick, is just that again, is his floor high enough to be worth putting up with such a low ceiling? He's just not going to get much better. He plays center only. It's the same question with Lindstrom, really. What do you do with this guy if he's not good enough to be your starting center or backup center? Like, how do you fit him on the team?
it's a really good question, because let's say the Cowboys want to stick with Biotish as their center, Farniak as the backup. Can you keep two centers on the practice squad? If the answer is no, you're probably going to take the guy with more upside versus the polished guy, right?
Well, yeah, and I have to think, that's probably part of the reason that they're talking about Empey playing guard, is that they're hoping that he could, put on some weight and kind of serve a different role. I would guess that they probably like both of these guys, as undrafted free agents, right? And I understand, as far as undrafted free agent offensive linemen go, they're good. I think the question becomes, like, are they going to get better? How much better are they going to get? And how do you keep them on your team while they're getting better without, exposing them to waivers or that sort of thing? I think that's really going to be the difficult part, is if they don't come in and make a strong impression right away, there's going to be some tough decisions to be made on exactly how you keep these guys on the roster.
I also wanted to mention, according to Pro Football Focus, Empey is the highest graded pass blocking center to enter the league since 2018. Yeah, that's over Tyler Linderbaum at Iowa, and the third highest graded center in terms of run blocking. In terms of WAR among all offensive linemen since 2018, he's second. So he's been really, really good. And that's why I mentioned the college tape to you, because he was fantastic in college. It's just coming from BYU in a little bit of a smaller school and the huge jump in competition, how much is that going to knock him, especially when he's a bad athlete? We'll see. But I like him.
The results look good. My question with him is, does what I saw on tape that was working for him in college work in the NFL? I don't know if it does, because he's not finishing guys, and the guys that he's not finishing are not NFL players. So what NFL players going to do when they get hit?
What should be nice this year, the first time in a while, is I feel like we're going to get to preseason and the offensive line isn't going to be a complete disaster on the third and fourth games, right? Like, it's not going to be just a train wreck like it is most years, because I do think Empey and Lindstrom, and if you have Farniak back there and you have Josh Ball, and we'll see let's go. But, like, you have some guys that you've invested some good draft capital in, or guys that were highly thought of coming out of college. They've got some depth that's actually worth watching this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, in training camp, especially in preseason games, like you mentioned, that's key. It really helps the evaluation process a lot easier when your team can function because it has an offensive line.
All right, we got one more player to talk about. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about Built Bar. Summer is coming, just like winter came. I later wanted me to do a really bad Game of Thrones part of this, but no. With summer coming, you're going to need some food with you to go. Built Bar is the perfect snack to take with you on the golf course, family vacations, or wherever you're going. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means you can eat them because you know they're healthy, and you're actually going to enjoy doing it. Most Built Bars only contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. Compare that to your average candy bar that has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and it's not even really a contest. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your next order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, Landon, last guy we need to talk about, Micah Tafua, a edge rusher from Utah. Again, one of these older players that the Cowboys signed, tons of production coming out of Utah, but how does it translate to the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, again, another guy where lots of production, lots of skill. The athleticism is what worries you here, right? He's got an odd, let's just say this: he has an odd match of skill set and body, right?
Yes.
Like he's a power player, but he's sub 6'3", he's sub 250 pounds, he's got sub 33-inch arms. They're skinny arms, they're skinny legs, and he's got kind of a thick core. It's like in my sort of way, but not in the not nearly as bad. He lined up mostly in a 2-point stance on the outside, but at the same time, you saw him in 3-point stances playing some 3 at several different points. They kind of just moved him all over the place. And I did a little bit of research on Tafua a little bit. For Utah, he represented, I think, 30% of their sack and pressures, which is the highest in the nation. Like, I think pretty much by far. He was basically the only pressure player they had on that defense. And they used him as they didn't use him as such, which is weird, right? Like they there were so many times when I see him dropping into coverage or just kind of playing more of a traditional linebacker role, and then they would, instead of actually, it's like they played him at every position except for the one that he probably would play the best, which is like a wide 9 or a 7 technique where he's got his hands on the ground. He's playing 7 standing up. He's playing a 3 technique. I think he's stiff and not explosive. And so I think that's going to limit his pass rush upside, beyond kind of developing what current power moves he already has. Now, he does have some advanced hand usage. He has like a stab swipe that he uses. Honestly, like when he's coming out of the 3-point stance, he keeps his pad level very low. But when he's in the 2-point stance, it's almost like he just stands straight up and tries to fight with these guys. I know that I can't be the only person that saw this guy and thought Bradley and I. Just maxed out limited traits with effort and execution. Like that's how he's winning. Like it's just he's going to win. I think he will have value for some teams because he's going to win lots of these late in the snap situations. I saw a lot of late in the snap and unblocked sacks that he had, right? Unblocked stuff, I mean, that just happens with some of these pass rushers. But lots of these kind of first effort's not going to get there. Second effort doesn't quite get there. Third effort gets there as the guy's sitting in the pocket. His tackle radius isn't great, and it can cause inconsistent finish at times. There were times where you saw him kind of over throttle to the quarterback, and because of his tackle radius, he gets his hands off on the quarterback, but then falls off because he can't bring the guy down. He's got very good hand-eye coordination. He gets his hands into passing lanes. You see him knocking balls down a lot. Good at lowering his pads to obtain and hold leverage on the outside. He can set the edge as a run defender, which will be valuable for him. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. He needs to improve his get-off. I mean, he's just slow to react to the snap, and he doesn't have great explosion. When he does win early, the times when he does win early, it's when he's coming from a 3-point stance on the outside where his pad level is low and he can use quick hand techniques. If he gets into a point where he's like hand fighting with these guys, it's over. He just doesn't have the athleticism to kind of give a second effort.
No,
unless he is just outworking the guy, and then eventually it's a cleanup sack. Where does he win? Relentless effort and execution and unanswered questions to me is if he doesn't provide value as a special teamer, which I just don't know how much value you're going to get as a special teamer out of this guy. He's not really athletic. Can he provide enough value as a bottom of the rotation pass rusher, enough value to the bottom of a pass rush rotation to stick around in the league?
We talk all the time about what Dan Quinn wants from like a right defensive end, right? He wants guys that are sub 4.6 40-yard dash that can bend, and he'll teach them the rest, right? Tafua's the opposite, right? Like the handwork is really good. I think he's pretty advanced that way. The technique is good, but he just doesn't have the athleticism. And it's so tough because he was very productive last year in the Pac-12. His win rate over the last 3 years was 16%, second best in the conference, only behind Kayvon Thibodeau. I struggle with this one, Landon, because I want it to happen, but this seems like a guy that probably sticks around in some practice squads, has a couple of nice moments in the preseason, but I just don't see him probably having a big impact in the NFL.
I think he needs to be outside linebacker in a 3-4, but there's just not a lot of that anymore. Like it's 3-4-4-3 is going away. It's more about odd and even fronts, and even the odd fronts are different nowadays. They're running them more like 3-3s. They're kind of interesting nickel stuff. I would have liked this guy as kind of a Sam linebacker in like the early 2000s versions of a 3-4, right? Because I think he can do a little bit of everything. He can pressure the quarterback and if you needed to. I think the fact that he can play the run as well as he does gives him a chance. I think because he doesn't have the requisite athleticism to be a pass rusher only. You know what I'm saying? Like he's not so enticing as a pass rush specialist to stick on a roster. If Bradley and I can't make it as a pass rush specialist, this guy definitely can't. And I think the fact that he has a better run chops, I think will actually help him potentially down the road if someone will be willing to develop him a little bit. I think he could end up being a useful backup defensive end, outside linebacker hybrid type guy because I think he can give you some snaps early on first down and then on third down, be part of a pass rush. Yeah. Certainly not the focus.
What's going to hurt him is that he's going to turn 26 as a rookie, and he's not a great athlete. So how many teams, including the Cowboys, are going to put this guy in their practice squad and say, hey, 2-3 years down the road, let's see what we have? Probably not many, right? So I'm not ruling him out having a great training camp and preseason. I can almost guarantee you I'm going to tweet out a gif of him beating Matt Let's in practice, and we're all going to get excited for about 5 minutes. But I just don't know how it's going to translate to the NFL. I would love to be wrong here, though.
Real quick, I've been comparing him to Bradley and I, but the big difference here, of course, is that Bradley and I is 3 years younger than Micah Tafua. Yeah, Micah Tafua. Like that's.
And I think Bradley and I was a better college player, frankly.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Again, when you get somebody that's that productive coming out of college in a big school like Utah that does have a bunch of NFL players, you can't write them off. It's just I think the other two guys have a much better chance of sticking in the NFL.
All these guys are going to be very useful in training camp because I think Tafua may not make the team or maybe he makes some other team, but at the very least, I think he's going to give you good looks for some of your down roster folks as they're trying to work their way up into training camp. You're not just, this guy's got skills. Like he can at least show an offensive tackle some hand movements that they're going to see in the NFL. So I think that there is value to the team overall for some of these guys, just having them on the roster and then having them be involved in the reps that the players take in the training camp.
What's tough is like last year we saw the Cowboys side with Azur Kamara over Bradley and I, right? Like they ended up releasing an eye and keeping Kamara. Now they eventually released Kamara as well once they got some other guys back, but it's pretty clear they want athleticism over polished players. So this one's tough, but we'll see. Don't be surprised at all if Tafua has a really strong training camp, a really strong preseason, and does make it hard for the Cowboys to cut him, especially if he comes out of the preseason with multiple pressures, a sack or two. He'll be an interesting guy to watch. All right, that is it for today's. Go ahead. Do you have a final thought?
No, I was just gonna say, not all of these guys come in to be to make a roster. Some of these guys come in to help facilitate training camp and give you good looks, just to bring in talent. So if Tafua comes in and actually shows himself able to actually stick around on the team somehow, that's gravy. Like the best part is that getting a guy like this who has some experience, who has some skins to the wall, to kind of at least come in and just bring a competitive temperament to training camp.
Yeah, I cannot wait to watch. Well, let's go. The 6'8" offensive tackle try to block a 6'2", 240-pound edge rusher. It's going to be really fun to practice. All right. Make sure you guys check us out tomorrow. We're going to be talking about a couple other defensive guys that you should maybe be interested in. Wednesday, we're going to be talking about some pass catchers that the Cowboys signed. And frankly, I think all three of the guys that they signed for the pass catchers have a realistic shot to make the roster. So you won't want to miss those shows. Follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube. You can follow Landon at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We'll see you guys next time.